we have one last panel filled with great hacks and very helpful tips that might help you in the workplace, but just in general. So I'm super excited to introduce the panel, and then I will be moderating. So you already have met Sadie, who just did a wonderful talk about her story into dealing with neurodiversity while being in the industry. I'm going to introduce Kassandra, who is a self-professed nerd who loves to bring order to chaos and uses this skill to solve big business problems. She's been a long-term advocate for mental health, wellness, and strives to use her voice to create safe spaces for neurodiverse and Black and Indigenous people of color, individuals in tech. I never know whether to say BIPOC or BIPOC or what, so I just say it all. And then we have Kat Contillo, who uses she, her, they, them pronouns interchangeably. Kat brings humor, passion, and awkwardness into everything they do. Kat is a threat ops analyst at Huntress as a full-time job. On the side, Kat enjoys speaking on topics she's passionate about, like neurodiversity, LGBTQ plus rights, autism, chronic illnesses, and all general topics in diversity and inclusion efforts. Okay, and then like I said, you have met Sadie before. So to get started, I guess you don't have to disclose what you don't feel comfortable disclosing. And of course, I just think it would be nice to talk about our flavoring of neurodiversity. And so my flavor is ADHD. I was diagnosed in 2019, so a pretty late diagnosis in my life. But that is my challenge. I'm sure there's other stuff. There's a lot of co-occurring things, but for right now, that's been the most painful. So I would say that. What about you all? And I'll let you decide. I guess Kassandra, you can go first.
I'll go first. I like to say that I am a mixed bag of interesting goodies. There's a lot of stuff in here. I would think anxiety and ADHD symptoms are my primary difficulties. But as you know, being a Black woman navigating mental health and the structures around those, finding out what your diagnosis is or what you're dealing with, or even how to treat it can be very difficult. So it is a process that's still in process.
Yeah, we're all kind of, if you're from different backgrounds, we're all kind of pioneering this type of research into self. So yeah, not a lot of guidance. What about you, Sadie? I'm going to move over to you.
Yes, definitely also a mixed bag. I think one of the coffee cups that I just got recently says it all. It says, "Is my mental health improving, or is this just a manic episode, the musical?"
Because sometimes you have to ask yourself.
Exactly. So ADHD, I have anxiety, depression, OCD, Tourette-like symptoms, Queen Crown. Got them all.
Okay, and Kat?
So I have like a bunch of learning disabilities and like auditory processing disorder, and then I was diagnosed autistic in 2007, senior year of high school. And then I just recently, through just learning and just how when I was diagnosed autistic, it was like a light, oh my gosh, all of that really, I felt heard. But then there was a couple aspects that I'm starting to realize ADHD might be a lot of my answers to a lot of why is it a little bit different? So yeah, definitely on that. And anxiety, the whole mixed bag, totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was in therapy that I learned that sometimes our ADHD, because of how society interacts with our neurodiversity, that's why we actually have depression and anxiety. So they can tend to co-occur. So I'm glad that we got to kind of let the people know where we're coming from, what our backgrounds are, and what our relevance is to this topic and discussion. But this discussion is supposed to be about giving fun tips and tricks to be able to own and live with your neurodiversity peacefully, or as peacefully as possible in a world that wasn't really designed for us. So with that being said, the past couple of years, a lot of us have shifted to remote work or some sort of hybrid, or some of us have even gone back into the office. what tips in general do you have for working while being neurodiverse, whether that be remote work or whether that be working in an office or a mixture of the two? And I guess I'll do the same order as Kassandra going first.
Okay, I have to say that preparation and planning for me are of the utmost importance. Really being able to control my space at home and to create an environment where I can be as productive as possible is very important. So that starts out with having a routine. I try to keep to that. I try to eat breakfast every morning, get outside, get some fresh air before I log on, play with my dogs. I have a standing desk. I'm standing right now and I'm barefoot, which I need. Can't do that in the office. I take breaks. I have timers. I keep notebooks. Sometimes I have an entire panel of ideas going off in my head at once. So I have multiple notebooks to write those things down. I think for remote work, regardless of how it's being marketed right now, it's not a luxury for some. I want to repeat that. It's not a luxury. For a lot of us, it's a necessity for us to be productive and to be a valuable member of a team and to make impact. So being able to structure my environment, to light my candles, to have my diffuser going, all of those things help me, one, be my authentic self and to do my job. It's not a luxury. This is something that makes me comfortable and it makes me a better employee overall.
Awesome. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Mhm.
Working from home is a necessity in so many ways. And like you have mentioned, you're able to just accommodate yourself and put yourself in the best environment, which ultimately kind of takes the onus or responsibility off of your employer to create that environment for you. You're like, well, I have an environment. Just allow me to work from it. Okay, Sadie, what about you?
So for me, definitely working from home, having a schedule, but I also get anxiety about having a schedule. Sometimes I like to mix it up. So one big thing that I've really enjoyed and I try to strive for is evaluating every morning and saying, how am I feeling today and what kind of mode am I in? 90% of the time, my ADHD requires me to have music or TV or something that I've already heard on in the background so that my ADHD can go hang out and I can work. But then other times I need strict silence. So knowing what you need and then being able to set up your environment to suit that is amazing and really, like you said, required because at work you really can't control other people in your environment. And when I worked in a government building, especially, you could only bring in certain headphones or you could only bring in certain things. So a lot of like if you have music, you couldn't bring in an iPod, you can't bring in your phone. There's a lot of restrictions on what you can set up for your environment. So making sure that you have an environment that's flexible enough.
All right. Yeah, I think that that's super important, being able to have a flexible environment. And I didn't even conceptualize the thought of not being able to carry certain items into a government building makes a lot of sense. But I wouldn't have thought of that. So great points. Kat, what about you?
A lot of good points already made, but I think for me, the most important is having a separate space. So I have a second bedroom and literally only for my office. So I have that door that I open and that door that I close, and then I don't technically really go in there because if I could, I'd probably always work and I could get really obsessed with working. So that idea that you walk in, you have this time, I might not have structured time, but I have this room that I go into and I'm most likely doing 100% work. But and then I close that door, open the door when I have a break, and it kind of just gives me that segue out. So I think that is really important. I've only worked from home, so I don't know anything else. And I really liked what Kassandra said about it's not really a luxury. It is literally a necessity because if I couldn't work from home, I would not be having a job right now. So I thought that was a really good idea. Another thing that Sadie had brought up, which was like the idea that you can't bring in things. So the one thing that I was just like thinking about was, oh my gosh, I cannot not go to work and have no headphones or like either a Bluetooth speaker or something to have music. So sometimes when I'm doing like something like threat hunting and I have to do a tedious task, music allows my brain to like just stop focusing on everything that my mind is thinking and just kind of like drowns that out and allows me to focus. So for me, like noise canceling headphones, Bluetooth speakers, or also that idea that maybe I don't want music, but I also don't want really noisy craziness. So that's the aspect of having my own office and just kind of like allowing my own space. I'd also say pet therapy and having a cat helps really, really a lot.
Yeah, I actually, just a quick note, I actually have been looking to adopt a dog because I've heard that for neurodiverse people, it actually eases some of our symptoms significantly. So definitely there's statistics that back what you just said. And I also did want to double tap on something that Sadie said earlier about like sometimes routine is helpful, and then sometimes you kind of are rebellious against routine, or you have anxiety around routine, because every day is really different sometimes, or every week is really different, and what works and what doesn't. And it's a constant struggle to be conscious about, hey, am I being effective? And constantly asking yourself, am I being effective? Am I being productive in the way that I need to, or do I just need a break? So great tips. What about accommodations? Since we're talking about the workplace and we talked about how working from home for some is just not a luxury, it's a necessity. What accommodations have you asked for in the past, or have worked for you in the past, or that you know of that might work?
I'll start. I think one that I have asked for in the past that has been extremely successful was schedule flexibility. To speak to Sadie's point, at one point I was working 4 days, 10 hours a week, 10 hours a day. And that worked very well for me because it gave me an extra day at the end of the week to kind of get myself together, to go to my appointments and to do all of those extra things that we need to de-stress before the week starts again. Another thing that I do or did ask for was, agendas before meetings, being able to turn my camera off, being able to decline meetings that I didn't have to be at. I think really being vocal and asking for what I wanted directly correlated to an exponential increase in my productivity overall. Whereas in the past, I wouldn't ask, and then I would struggle and I would suffer through, trying to fit myself in a box that really was not created for me. So now I'm very adamant about asking upfront for the things that I need. Those are a couple. I'll let the others share.
Sadie?
Yes, definitely pretty much all of those. I think also things you don't think of, and I think that's what makes us neurodivergent people, we're really thoughtful about, accommodations. And so making sure you ask for not just yourself, but also for other people. I try to. So for example, I had to take a course online the other day, a test or something. And so I said, I really want Bluetooth speakers because I need the music, right? And I work with other people. And they said, no, you can't have speakers. But I wasn't told that ahead of time. So I had prepped. And then I'm like, okay, now I have to do this cold turkey. Oh my goodness. Or, the file names that were in the test. I have dyscalculia as well. So the file names would be like, okay, look at image 543 and 732. And I'm like, those are the same. I don't see the difference there. And you're on a timed test. So I was like, we're not thinking that this is not helpful. So I think definitely, like you said, asking for yourself, but also sometimes if you can, ask for other people, because I think a lot of us have been doing this for a while and have seen the benefit of doing that. But I remember years ago when I wouldn't, and like you said, you struggle hard. And it's
Right.
not until you see someone else and you say, oh, that's not a special accommodation that's going to put a star next to my name. That's just an accommodation that anybody can have. So.
Yeah, then that speaks to
Definitely.
your point about in your earlier talk about feeling less than. Sometimes you don't want to ask because you don't want to put a big old, exclamation point near you where people are afraid to interact with you because they're like, oh, I don't want to overwhelm you, or overly
Especially if
caught
you're a
up.
woman or if you're of color or any of those, if you're any minority too, you're like, I don't want to add more to this. I'm just
Yeah,
gonna.
it's already a struggle. Great points. Kat?
So currently Huntress is the only job I have, so I only can refer back to like accommodations I've had in like school and college, but currently just pertaining to work. I could close captions transcripts either with a live person for like actual meetings that are like company meetings. So somebody's actually typing there and putting all of it. I got to pick whether I wanted it to be like closed captions like at the bottom or a transcript, and I did much better with the transcript. I thought that maybe because I was remote I would be fine, but I did online learning, and I need to either be able to read the person's lips, and when someone's talking really fast, it's like out the window, or if I have a lot going on, I think it helps a lot more than just me. So that aspect, like if English is your second language, you could have closed captions that could help you a lot. So I thought that aspect was really good. I also use a AI option called otter.ai. And so if I'm in a meeting that's not produced and like I knew about it, it was just like a last minute, and I might be like, oh gosh, I don't know what, how am I going to grasp this information? I have that, and it records the whole thing, so I could replay it back, I could re-listen to it, I can read it on the screen as well during the time. It's not 100%, but it's better than my brain and just relying on my brain. That just wouldn't work. I also use something called Helperbird. It's a Google extension. It's I think the creator is dyslexic, but it helps everybody. It's just like an overall, just like all neurodivergent friendly Google section. And it's like, I could use it on Google Docs. I can use it on Google just in general. And it just helps me be more productive and reading if my brain is just too overloaded. And then the thing I wanted to say to support the other two speakers, which is the flexibility. I think that's something that I have like with my manager and it's not something that's like a needed thing to like contact HR. It was just more like, hey, listen, I have these types of, things, and the way that I can be my best self here is I need you to be understanding if I can't sign on early one day, or I have to get off and have a break, like a much longer break. I can come back maybe in an hour, or just have to take the day off, that sort of thing. And my manager understands that. So I would say those are all the accommodations I currently use at work.
Dealing with the flexible schedule, I will say also, I also try to make a flexible schedule for other people. And so it seems more normal, I guess, to everybody else. So I'll usually reach out to somebody if I have a due date that's 3 weeks from now, and I'll reach out to them 3 weeks early and be like, hey, the reason why I'm reaching out is life gets crazy. Why don't we just, get this in our brains now, and then you can work on it to your leisure. And after I started introducing that, people don't seem as, oh my God, you need to do this at the last minute. And then I panic and need to do it at the last minute. So making that seem more of like a norm, kind of like sneaking that into the neurotypicals so they don't even realize it's happening. It's also useful too.
I think it also helps as well with the understanding that a lot of people who are neurodivergent also suffer from or also deal with chronic illness, like Sadie discussed earlier. We have a lot of energy shifts. So the flexible schedule allows me to sign on at 6 in the morning and work if that works for that day, or to work into the night later on if that works for me. So, like you said, being locked into that 8 to 5, sometimes my peak hours of productivity or focus don't fall in that set time. Having a manager that understands that, hey, if she can knock this out in an hour after hours when no one's pinging, and bothering her, I'm going to let her do that. So like Kat said, having really supportive leadership who's open to those flexibilities is a really good thing.
I think that's also a good point to bring up. What some people were asking in one of my Slack channels is, fear of repercussions of, disclosing. And that particular area is where I really was afraid of repercussions, because I thought, okay, well, if they're never going to put me on a client meeting because the client's not going to reschedule at the last minute. I think that you also need to make it clear to your boss that for certain things, I can push myself and get them done. I mean, they might not be done great, but if I have a meeting at 5 and I need to be there, I'll be there if I need to be there. I've had to reiterate that lots of times throughout my career, just so that they don't take me off the list of people who are allowed to do things. So I think just also make sure to make that clear, so you avoid that whole issue of why aren't I invited to anything anymore? And everyone just says, well, we thought you'd just hanging out.
Yeah, I think to speak to everyone's point, like it seems like communication is like a really big deal. But it also seems that, you've taken time to study yourselves and see what doesn't work, what does work. And, being neurodiverse means that like you're your own experiment every single day, because you can literally do something that worked so amazingly yesterday or even last week and then try it today. And it's like, nope, doesn't take.
Work.
So in that vein of like having to communicate what works for you and how to basically being a guide to other people about how to navigate you, how do you feel like the workplace, the attitude is when it comes to accommodations and asking for that stuff? Like, how do you perceive it? Or do you feel like it's always welcome? Do you feel like there's always a lot of explaining? Do you feel like it's even draining to even have those conversations sometimes? Like, what has been your experience with that?
I think the process needs serious work. I think a lot of companies really need consultation with how to audit their existing policies and procedures, and then how to move forward to make them more inclusive. I'd like to see this shift from the mindset of creating accommodations and support to an environment that's inclusive for everybody. Usually I found that the process to request accommodations it's been extremely bulky and intrusive, and a lot of times HR, no offense, are not trained, right, to know specifically what you need, how to get access to that without being intrusive, right? In the last couple of weeks, I've heard a lot of sad stories from people that I know directly that have either been denied accommodations or have withdrew their request because of that issue, right? Intrusiveness, too many loopholes, red tape, bureaucracy, all of that. I think as this panel shows, as this conference shows, there are a lot of people in this space who want to learn more, they want to be educated, and they can provide that information in their workplace if they're given the platform to talk about it, and it's a safe space where they can be open. So for all of the leaders on the call who are listening today, please create that open door policy where people are comfortable with sharing, and they may share for themselves. And like Sadie said, they may help you to create policy that can help everyone else on the team and maybe throughout the company.
I definitely agree and mirror all of that. And I definitely have had both experiences. I mean, the government has laws, and most of the laws actually pertain to disabled people. And so I have chronic illness, but technically I'm not disabled. So I had to have a lot of open conversations and uncomfortable conversations with people, and they were being nice, but they were like, it'd be a lot easier if you just declare yourself as disabled. And I was like, well, I feel like I shouldn't have to just do that to make everything easier. But you kind of get both points of view, and that just wasn't the place for me. And so I think also understanding at what point do you stop fighting because it's too much for you, and you look somewhere else, I think is a huge thing. I also forgot the original question.
How do you feel about the workplace attitude? I think you already spoke to it, which is, you've experienced them not basically based on technicalities. They were like, well, if you would just declare yourself something entirely, then it would be easier for us to get you, which is
right.
Not very, not very supportive.
I think the other thing too, the other way is once you kind of get in the habit of advocating for yourself, if you start doing that on a daily basis, you kind of grow confidence, and people kind of just say, oh, well, she must know what she's talking about, or she must know that, the company allows her to do that. And so like I said before, like sneaking that into neurotypicals and being like, hey, I'm doing this so that, you can be accommodated. Are you going to accommodate me as well? Isn't that nice? And people go, oh, that is really nice. And you're like, yeah. Or I gave feedback on that test that I had to give. And I said, hey, it would be really nice if these files were named like apple and orange. Wouldn't that be way easier to remember? And they went, oh, that's brilliant. And you're like, see, it benefits everyone. So
exactly.
That seems to be the easiest way to get through to everybody, instead of having to, like you said, single yourself out and have to kind of really talk about all of the negative qualities that you have in order to get this accommodation that may or may not actually help. You kind of want to almost demonstrate that, look at me, look what I'm doing, look how I'm adjusting, and see how well I'm working. And you kind of say, that's why I'm working so well, is because I'm able to have all these kind of accommodations. So definitely
It's kind of like,
show
sorry,
yourself.
I was gonna say it's kind of like when, well, I don't know about anybody else's experiences, but when I was in high school and we were trying to put our college essays in, and everybody's being very, very, very dramatic with their life stories, because they're like, the college advisors or the people in the acceptance committee, like they don't respond to anything else. It's like you feel the need to overemphasize certain things that you might not want to, or you might not feel the innate need to do that, just so that people can really understand your struggles. And it's a lot. So
Oh, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, to the point where at one point, and it was very sad, I said, sometimes I almost wish that I only had one leg, because then you'd say, okay, I can see that and see that you can't walk. And so here you go, here's some
yeah,
accommodations. And I was like, the fact that we have to get to the point where we have to feel like we need more pain,
yeah,
that's just not acceptable.
yeah. Kat, what about you? What do you feel the attitude has been in your experience, or just in general?
I mean, both of them hit the nail on the head. So I'm just sitting here thinking, like, do I have anything else? I think the two other things I would just say on top of all of that would be, one, most companies are looking at accommodations as like too much money to spend. Is it even worth to spend it on this person or whatever? And in reality, like, I think that that's not the attitude you should have. If you have that attitude, no one should be working for you. And I also think that the word accommodations comes with a negative connotation. I go back as far as like college, and I had teachers stand up, even knowing that I had an accommodation. They're like, I'm not allowing you to cheat. You're not taking this test. And I'd be like, I have an accommodation. It's not cheating. It's just extra time, because my brain needs to process the information that way. And it got to the point where I needed the people in the disability center to come and like have a confrontation with this teacher who just could not understand why I was cheating. And so if you think about that sort of thing, I think that there's a lot of people out there that just don't understand. And I think that what goes to Sadie's point is, you're not seeing it, right? So like learning disabilities, most neurodivergent, conditions underneath the umbrella, most of them are invisible. So like, how can you understand if you don't have that person in your circle, right? So that goes on so many other different aspects. I think a lot of education and a lot of that needs to be done. It's not our responsibility 100%. So other people have to get in the weeds and like actually learn and understand and have conversations and ask. And I think like today, like SANS Neurodiversity and Cybersecurity allows people in the industry to understand that aspect. Maybe it's just an extension on a a browser, or maybe it's just the flexibility, right? Like there are other things and that don't cost a lot of money, and that's not what it should be looked at. I think that in the end, an accommodation should be seen as a way to help somebody that you believe in to do that, to do work at your company, and just support them. It's literally just support. But yeah.
Like Kat said, also, I think a lot of us, we've already figured out our accommodations. Like I don't have a lot of money, but I try to figure out the best way I can to get through life. So we have these life hacks, right? So
Yes.
we're not looking for you to spend millions of dollars. I might just need like a twist tie and, a plastic bag, and I'm all set.
Like
And
MacGyver.
also, we enjoy the puzzle solving, so we will take
Yeah.
on that task and hyper focus on what way will work best.
And
So just
like
all we
Kat
need is the
said, I
support.
mean, you only see really the horrible cases. Like I saw people who would have that same experience in college, and you'd be like, well, I don't want to be part of that. But why aren't we highlighting it, when this person gets promoted? I mean, I try to make it a point to say, yeah, and I happen to be neurodivergent, just so that we're balancing the scales a little bit, to say I look normal, yeah, sure, but that doesn't mean that I don't have accommodations. Like
Right.
this is what accommodations look like. Look how well I'm doing.
Exactly. Okay, in that same vein, when we are kind of being told that our accommodations are too expensive, or to make it easy on people by declaring different things that are not actually what we deal with. Do you feel like at some point you deal with imposter syndrome, which I know is like kind of rhetorical because duh, but if you do, what hacks, tips, advice do you have for combating imposter syndrome while you work or even in your career or even outside of that?
Yes, definitely. This is something I have struggled with and I'm still struggling with at times. I think the best way for me to initially deal with that situation is to disconnect. I have the habit of trying to want to jump even further into the issue to prove myself, and that is never successful. So, stepping back and really getting some understanding of what's going on, the dynamic, and getting some clarity for me is number one. I keep a win sheet. That's what I call it. It's a list of like all of my accomplishments. I've been very successful throughout my career. Not to like toot my horn, but I think it's very important for us to remember what we have done, what we are doing, and what we are capable of doing, because sometimes it's completely denied or negated on a day-to-day basis, and it gets to you after a while. Keep that win sheet. I have a good circle of friends, family. I have an amazing coach. I have mentors. I volunteer. I surround myself with people who are positive and they pour that positivity back into me. So when I'm having a low day, I know I can pick up the phone or text Nathan and say, hey, let's have a chat. This happened today. What do you think? I need some feedback. And usually that helps to pull me out of circling the drain.
Sadie?
Definitely, I definitely agree. And I think also sometimes we have to think and realize, it's not a perfect world, and there's always going to be people who are going to compare you to less than, right? But I try to make it a point of, if someone's going to compare me to someone else, I'm going to also do it both ways. Then and I try to like evaluate during the day, how many things did I do today just to meet the standard of a neurotypical person? And when you write out that list of the things and the accommodations you have to make in order to just get through the day, it's a long list. And you say, holy crap, not only did I do my job and I have a blog and I'm a mom or whatever, look at this laundry list of things that my brain did today. And it kind of gives me more empowerment. Like, that's not horrible. Like, I'm actually doing way more than the average person. So you gotta give yourself that win too. I think also the imposter syndrome, I think definitely, like you said, surrounding yourself, but also I think really work on the words that you use with people. So when especially at work or with people I'm not as familiar with, instead of saying like, hey, are you ADHD? Instead of saying something like that makes people really uncomfortable, you could say, hey, were you really zoning out during that meeting too? And people will be more likely to say, oh yeah, I couldn't. And so you kind of get that open dialogue to kind of talk more about it. And then you're going to see that people who you idolize and think are these, neurotypical people really aren't. They're just also good at hiding it. And so once you kind of learn those phrases, you're like, okay, I can see through the masks. And then at some point I've actually been like, okay, so you're neurodivergent too. And they're like, oh, how'd you know? And I'm like, explain to no one. So definitely, yeah. So it's a little bit harder for neurotypical or less, less aggressive, I guess, neurodivergent people to kind of have those conversations. So I've done a lot of research on like, what is the research that's being put out to neurotypical people and trying to use those words so that they're not so scared. And then they realize we're not really that scary. And we do all of this. And we're also a whole bag of chips.
Yeah, agreed. I'm definitely a bag of chips. Kat, what about you? Any tips for dealing with imposter syndrome?
So I know that Kassandra and I talked about this like a couple months back in another talk, but the things that I think that I've dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome since coming into the cybersecurity realm. And I noticed that if you keep it inside, it doesn't help. So I didn't even know the name for it, honestly. So when I first was dealing with it, as someone who loves to learn as much as possible about everything that I can, cybersecurity, you can't actually do that. just so much unless you like specialize in something. And so that was starting to mess with my brain. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. I'm never gonna be able to amount to like that area that I usually hit when I learn about something, like, and I hyperfixate and I hyperfocus on whatever I'm learning. And so I was like going down this like whole other imposter syndrome tunnel. And I just decided to reach out to somebody at the time, and they were like, oh no, you're not alone. Maybe you're alone on the aspect of like, you need to know everything, but like, you're not going to know everything in cybersecurity. So you're going to have to learn to just like deal with it. And I was like, what? I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And I was like, specialization, I'm just going to specialize in something. But in the end, I realized that even people that are like big names in cybersecurity who like know a lot have imposter syndrome. And so like when I was starting to find that out from other people that were like big names, and I was like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, but you can like talk about it like you don't even, I was like, I don't understand. And so like when I finally like started having conversations with other coworkers and other people in the cybersecurity industry, I started to realize, but wait a second, this is like a real deal thing that happens. So I remind myself always, and I have little sticky notes for other than just imposter syndrome, but like little reminders that are positive, like phrases or sentences, just to remind myself, like, you're not alone. There are people just like you, and even people more expertise than you are, who also get this. I also have found a connection with my imposter syndrome when it happens, is that I take on too much when I'm burnt out, or if I'm having a flare, or something like that. I'm having a bad brain day. I just push myself a little too much, and then I'm not doing as well as I typically do, which Sadie made a really good point, right? So like, we're typically doing way more than neurotypical people. And I'm realizing that like what I'm doing that day is exactly what my neurotypical coworkers are doing. And I'm like, wait a second, this is okay. I'm okay to do this. I don't have to like stress out. So in terms of that aspect, I do have a lot of things on my calendar that pop up as like little reminders, like, hey, take a break, walk away from the computer, or just breathe and drink some water, or read this like little note that pops up that I put in like 3 months ago that states like, you're okay, everything's okay, like, you got this, focus on what you need to focus on. And then I would just say, I also look at my successes, which I think is something like Sadie was saying before, which is like, I look at my successes and what I've succeeded in my position. In the last, I've only been in the industry for 3 years almost, in August, and I've done a lot. So I have to like stop for a minute and just realize those things, because burnout can trigger imposter syndrome for me. I don't know if that's anything for anybody else, but I have to realize that I don't reach that limit. Look at where I am at, look at how far I came, even just like for the day, look at how many reports I did today, or how many investigations. I'm okay. I can take like a 10-minute break and just kind of pull myself out of that. So those are the things that I typically do.
Yeah, and to your point about burnout also causing imposter syndrome, I feel like that's the truth, because you're not able to perform at your normal capacity. So of course you're like comparing yourself to others, but also comparing yourself to the past version of you too. And you're like, but I was able to do this before. Why am I not able to now? So yeah, we do have 2 minutes left. So I want to give everyone a chance to have some parting thoughts. And then we'll go ahead and close out and answer questions via the Slack channel.
Okay, I'll do this as quick as possible. I wrote these down. But number one, find your people. If you're in the wrong circle, you will not be able to act authentically. People who value you will encourage you to be yourself. Number two, find support. It could be a coach, a mentor, your therapist, psychiatrist. Surround yourself with supportive people who will help you maintain good mental health and positive self-regard. When I'm feeling down and I need a reality check, these are the folks that I reach out to. And lastly, embrace your differences. Throughout my life, I've been bullied. I think a lot of people have that story. I have had the "you are not a culture fit" conversation, and I've suffered from negative self-image because of what I tried to be, which was what I was not. So I don't squeeze myself into boxes anymore. I refuse to do it. Considering the card that I've been dealt, I've been successful more than most because of my difference, not in spite of it, because. If what you bring to the table does not fit, find another table.
Beautiful. Beautifully
I
said.
prepared that last night.
So, right, Sadie, your turn.
Well, following that up, okay. I think that being an advocate for yourself, even when it gets hard, is a really big thing. And I think, like you said, surrounding yourself with people who understand you, but also challenge other people, because if people are going to challenge you, you should be allowed to challenge other people. And so I to the mentor and, people who are big in the industry, topic, I've actually reached out to those people and been like, hey, let's talk about this topic, because you know what, the worst thing that happens is they're going to say I'm an idiot, and I already knew that might be coming. The best thing that could happen is I learned that they're just a person, and like you said, Kat, they have doubts, they aren't so confident in other areas of their expertise, and you end up making a friend in the community, and you start to realize, okay, what everybody pictures as the perfect person might not be as perfect. And so question those norms, question everything. And that's part of why we're so good at being, neurodivergent. We question a lot of things. So just do it. And, you guys, I mean, as you go through life, you've already had a lot of shit thrown at you. So, I mean, what's one more thing? That's kind of how I view things. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to ask anyway. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And lastly, for people who are new to owning your story, talk with people who are owning their story, because we've all been there. We've all been people who have been afraid to disclose. We've had positive and negative experiences. So if you are afraid of that, just reach out. I mean, neurodivergent people are some of the most caring, sensitive, just want to help people learn type of people. And so just chat with them, and we're not going to ask you, hey, what's your diagnosis, and give me all of your medical data. We're just, you know what I mean, like other people would. We're just going to be like, hey,
HIPAA.
right?
HIPAA violation.
Say, well, this is how it happened for me. Let's go.
I love it. Kat, what about you?
So I don't really know what to say, except for I think the one thing I noted for myself to say at this point was just focus on your strengths, right? And look at yourself, because everyone's different. What works for each one of us here might not work for you, and it's just a trial and error in terms of self-hacks and fighting burnout and stress and stuff. And just also realize, I think one of the notes is that what we said earlier was not everything's going to work every single day. So something that might have been working for like 6 months for you might not work one day, and you'd be like, oh my gosh. And that's why I think it's really important to have multiple tips and tricks and hacks on how to handle or be able to work, or anything in terms of just handling stress and burnout and stuff, because of course it can happen not at work, right? So it can also happen in your everyday life, and you bring that to work. So I would just say focus on that, and best of luck. I'm always here.
Yeah, excellent, wonderful.